They came with chainsaws and bulldozers, tearing down the bridge I built to honor my wife, Sarah, who loved ducks and this lake. I spent months carving every piece of that bridge, pouring my heart into it after she passed away. But Delilah Thornwick, the HOA president, called it ugly and ordered it destroyed, saying it didn't fit her fancy neighborhood. She thought she could push me around, but she didn't know I'd been studying laws that could turn her perfect lakefront into a swamp full of mosquitoes. My name's Ezra Blackwood, a 58-year-old retired Navy engineer, and I wasn't about to let her win. After they smashed my bridge, I found out her $2.8 million mansion was built on land it shouldn't be on, protected wetlands, which is a big deal under federal law. I decided to fight back, not just for me, but for Sarah and everyone else Delilah bullied. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It was about showing a bully what happens when you mess with the wrong person. I'd spent 30 years in the Navy learning how to solve problems, and I was ready to use every bit of that knowledge to take her down. It all started one early morning when I heard diesel engines roaring outside my small cabin by Willowbrook Lake. I ran out to see a bright yellow bulldozer ripping through the cedar railings of my bridge, the ones I'd carved with duck designs to remember Sarah. Chainsaws screamed as they cut through the posts I'd sanded smooth with my own hands. Delilah stood there in her white blazer, looking like she was directing a war, her blonde hair perfect, not a strand out of place. She didn't even blink as my heart broke watching my work turn to splinters. That bridge wasn't just wood. It was my way of healing, my way of keeping Sarah's memory alive. She loved this lake, the ducks, the quiet beauty of it all. Delilah called it visual pollution, like my love for my wife was some kind of trash. I stood there, fists clenched, feeling helpless, but already thinking about how to fight back. I'd moved to Willowbrook Lake Estates to start over after Sarah's cancer took her from me. The neighborhood had all kinds of homes, small cabins like mine, cozy cottages, and huge mansions with perfect lawns. Delilah lived in the biggest one, a glass palace that screamed money. She drove a white Tesla with a license plate that said, "Blessed One," and she acted like she owned the whole lake. The HOA, which she ran like her personal kingdom, made rules about everything: how tall your grass could be, what color your mailbox had to be, even what kind of flowers you could plant. Most folks just went along with it, too scared to argue with her. But I wasn't most folks. In the Navy, I learned to read rules, find loopholes, and stand up to people who think they're untouchable. Delilah didn't know it yet, but she just started a fight with someone who knew how to fight back. That morning, as the bulldozer pushed the last pieces of my bridge into the lake, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let Delilah get away with this. I'd spent months at the county courthouse, digging through old papers, learning about the land and the laws. I found something big. Her mansion and a few others were built on protected wetlands, which is a serious crime. Wetlands are special areas that protect water, animals, and plants, and you can't just build on them without permission. Delilah's fancy house was breaking federal law, and I had the proof. I wasn't just fighting for my bridge. I was fighting for everyone she'd pushed around, for the lake Sarah loved, and for the memory of a woman who deserved better than to have her memorial called pollution. This was war, and I was ready to bring the fight to Delilah's doorstep. The HOA was supposed to keep the neighborhood nice, but Delilah used it to boss people around. She'd walk around with that fake smile, acting sweet while handing out violation notices for things like a messy lawn or a boat parked wrong. Most people were too scared to argue. She had money, lawyers, and a way of making you feel small. I met her one morning while I was rubbing oil into my bridge's railings. She clicked up my driveway in her high heels, smelling like strong perfume, and said my bridge was a rustic little project that didn't fit the neighborhood's standards. I told her it was a memorial for Sarah, but she didn't care. She said neighbors were complaining it looked bad and hurt property values. I asked who complained, but she wouldn't say, just handed me a letter saying I had 48 hours to take it down or face trouble. I checked the HOA rules before building, and nothing said I couldn't have a bridge. But Delilah didn't care about rules unless they helped her control people. I knew right then she was a bully, the kind who thinks money and power let them do whatever they want. In the Navy, I dealt with people like her, officers who thought they could push everyone around. I learned you don't back down from bullies. You outsmart them. I started digging, spending hours at the county courthouse, reading old property records and laws. That's when I found out about the wetlands. Willowbrook Lake had protected areas where building wasn't allowed because they're important for water, plants, and animals like ducks. Delilah's mansion and a few others were built right on top of these wetlands, which was against federal law. She thought she could destroy my bridge and get away with it, but I was already planning how to use her own secrets against her. This wasn't just about saving my bridge. It was about stopping someone who thought they could ruin lives and get away with it. The trouble started small but grew fast, like a spark turning into a wildfire. Delilah didn't like my bridge from the start. She said it looked homemade and didn't match the fancy vibe of Willowbrook Lake. I told her it was a memorial for Sarah, built on my own land, and followed all the HOA rules I'd read. But she didn't care. She sent me a letter saying my bridge was a visual violation and gave me 2 days to tear it down or pay a huge fine. I checked the HOA rules again, and there was nothing about banning bridges or decorations on your own dock. Delilah was making it up, trying to scare me into doing what she wanted. I told her the bridge wasn't going anywhere. It was for Sarah, and it was staying. That's when things got worse. Delilah started picking on other neighbors too. She fined Mabel, an older lady who lived nearby, for feeding ducks by the lake. Mabel had been doing it for years, and everyone loved watching the ducks swim by her cottage. Delilah said it was unsanitary and slapped her with a $200 daily fine. Another neighbor got fined for having a boat parked an inch too close to his driveway. People started whispering at the mailbox or over coffee, saying how fed up they were with Delilah's rules. But most were too scared to speak up. She had a way of making you feel like you'd lose everything if you crossed her. She'd show up with her clipboard, her fake smile, and that fancy car, acting like she owned the whole neighborhood. I wasn't scared, though. In the Navy, I learned how to read people like Delilah. She wasn't just bossy. She was a bully who enjoyed having power. I started talking to neighbors, quietly, to see who else was mad. Mabel was furious about her fines, and a young couple down the road got a notice for having a kid's swing set that was too colorful. Delilah was tightening her grip, making up new rules without telling anyone. I went to an HOA meeting to speak up, but it was a joke. Delilah and her friends on the board ignored questions and pushed through whatever she wanted. She said my bridge was hurting property values, but wouldn't say who complained or show any proof. I knew she was targeting me because I wouldn't bow down like the others. Then she started playing dirty. One day, a guy named Gerald from the county showed up with Delilah, saying my bridge was unsafe and a hazard for boats and fish. I almost laughed. My bridge was tiny, just a walkway to the island, but Gerald had papers saying I needed permits I'd never heard of. I asked when he checked my bridge, and he admitted he hadn't. He was going off photos Delilah gave him. That's when I knew she was making things up, trying to bury me in fake violations. I pulled out my own papers, the HOA rules I'd studied, which said I could build on my dock. Gerald looked nervous, like he knew Delilah was pushing him to do something shady. I told him her papers didn't match the real rules, and he promised to look into it. Delilah's smile got tight, and I could tell she wasn't used to people fighting back. I kept digging, spending days at the courthouse with Mabel. We found old maps from 1987 showing wetlands, special areas you can't build on because they protect the lake and animals. Delilah's mansion and 4 others were built right on top of them, which was a huge deal. Federal law says you can't mess with wetlands without permission, and they didn't have it. Delilah was breaking the law, and her fancy house was proof. She thought she could scare me with fines and fake rules, but I was building a case that could take her down. Every time she pushed me, I got stronger, like a sailor weathering a storm. I wasn't just fighting for my bridge anymore. I was fighting for everyone she'd bullied, for the lake, and for Sarah's memory. The fight exploded one Thursday morning when I woke up to the sound of engines roaring. I ran outside and saw a bulldozer tearing through my bridge, the one I'd built for Sarah. Chainsaws were cutting the duck carvings I'd spent months making, each one a piece of my heart. Delilah stood there in her white blazer, watching like she was proud of herself. 12 workers were ripping apart the cedar planks I'd sanded smooth, shoving them into the lake with a horrible cracking sound. I felt like I was losing Sarah all over again. That bridge was my way of keeping her close, of turning my pain into something good. Delilah called it visual pollution and said it didn't belong in her perfect neighborhood. I wanted to scream, but I knew yelling wouldn't stop her. I had to be smarter. I stood there, watching the bulldozer destroy my work, and remembered the papers I'd found at the courthouse. Delilah's $2.8 million glass mansion was built on protected wetlands, which is a federal crime. I'd been reading up on the Clean Water Act, a law that protects places like lakes and wetlands. If you build on them without permission, you can face huge fines, up to $37,500 a day. Delilah thought she could crush me, but she didn't know I had proof her house was illegal. I'd found old maps showing her land was a wetland before someone filled it with dirt to build her mansion. She was breaking the law, and I was ready to use it against her. I called her out right there, in front of the workers. Delilah, you know your house is built on wetlands, don't you? That's against federal law. Her face went pale, but she tried to laugh it off, saying I was crazy. The The workers stopped for a second, looking confused, but she waved them on. I could tell she was nervous though. Her perfect smile wasn't so perfect anymore. I went back to my cabin and called my old Navy buddy Jake, a lawyer who knew how to fight battles like this. I told him everything, about the bridge, the wetlands, and Delilah's fake rules. Jake laughed and said, "Ezra, she's picked a fight with the wrong guy. Let's bury her in paperwork." Jake told me to keep collecting proof, so I went back to the courthouse with Mabel. We found more documents, building permits from the 1980s that lied about the wetlands, saying the land was dry when it wasn't. Delilah's house, with its fancy infinity pool, was sitting on a natural spring that used to feed the lake. That spring was why the lake had so many ducks, the ones Sarah loved. But now, the water was dirty from pool chemicals and lawn fertilizers. I took pictures of the lake, the mansion, and the old maps, building a case that could stand up in court. Delilah thought she'd won by destroying my bridge, but she'd just made me more determined. That afternoon, Delilah sent a new letter, this time with a lawyer's name on it, saying I owed $15,000 for breaking HOA rules. It was another scare tactic, but Jake said it was nonsense. Her lawyer was tied to a shady company called Pinnacle that made money by fining people. I recorded a conversation when Delilah and her lawyer showed up at my dock, offering me $50,000 to drop my complaints. I said, "So you're trying to bribe me to ignore your crimes?" They froze, knowing I'd caught them. I sent the recording to Jake, who said it was proof of a felony. Delilah was digging her own grave, and I was ready to call the EPA to bring the hammer down. After Delilah destroyed my bridge, I knew I had to hit back hard. I spent days with Mabel at the courthouse, digging through dusty files like detectives. We found gold. Old maps from 1987, showing that Willowbrook Lake had wetlands where Delilah's mansion and 4 others now stood. Wetlands are protected by federal law because they keep water clean and give animals like ducks a home. Building on them without permission is a big deal, and Delilah's house was right on top of a natural spring. We also found fake building permits from the 1980s, saying the land was dry when it was clearly a wetland. Someone had lied to get those houses built, and Delilah was living in one of them. We didn't stop there. I learned the HOA hired a company called Pinnacle to manage the neighborhood. Pinnacle made money by fining people for little things, like Mabel's duck feeding or my bridge. Mabel found a contract showing Pinnacle got 15% of every fine they collected, so they had a reason to keep writing violations. It was a scam. Delilah and Pinnacle were working together to squeeze money out of regular folks like me and Mabel, while the rich mansion owners got away with everything. I took pictures of the lake, showing how dirty the water was from pool chemicals and lawn runoff. The ducks were gone, and the water smelled bad. I knew this was bigger than just my bridge. It was about saving the lake Sarah loved. I called the EPA and spoke to Agent Sarah Crawford. I told her about the wetlands, the fake permits, and the dirty water. I sent her all my proof, maps, photos, and water tests I'd done with a kit from the store. She said, "Mr. Blackwood, this is serious. We'll have people there in 2 days." Sure enough, EPA agents showed up with water testing gear and cameras, checking Delilah's property and the other mansions. They found chemicals in the water coming straight from her infinity pool. The agents said her house was an environmental hazard and taped it off like a crime scene. Delilah freaked out, screaming about her rights, but the agents didn't care. Federal law was on my side. Mabel and I kept digging and found out Pinnacle had done this in other neighborhoods too. They'd get hired, make up violations, and collect fines to get rich. Delilah was part of it, using her HOA power to help Pinnacle while protecting her rich friends. We also found emails where she talked about selling lakefront land to a developer friend, which explained why she hated my bridge. It made her land less perfect for selling. I shared everything with Jake, who said we had enough to file a federal complaint. Delilah thought she could scare me with lawyers and fines, but I was turning her own game against her, and the EPA was about to make her pay. Just when I thought I had Delilah cornered, she tried one last trick. She showed up at my dock with a fancy lawyer, offering me $50,000 to drop my EPA complaint. I recorded the whole thing on my phone, which is legal in my state. "You're trying to bribe me to cover up your crimes," I said, and her lawyer went pale. Delilah didn't stop. She threatened to call a county official who owed her favors to make the investigation go away. I sent the recording to Jake, who said it was proof of bribery and trying to stop a federal case, both serious crimes. Delilah was making mistake after mistake, and I was catching everyone. Then came the real shock. While the EPA was testing her property, I found out her infinity pool was built right over a natural spring that fed the lake. That spring was why Sarah loved this place. It brought ducks and kept the water clean. But Delilah's pool was dumping chemicals into it, killing the lake. The EPA said restoring the spring would flood her basement and ruin her mansion. She'd lose everything, her house, her money, her power. I called Agent Crawford and told her about the spring, sending her the 1987 maps. She said, "This changes everything. Her property is an environmental crime scene." Delilah had no idea the federal government was about to take her down. Delilah tried to fight back, filing a restraining order saying I was harassing her. It was a lie, claiming I was dangerous because of my Navy training. But Agent Crawford saw right through it, saying it was obstruction of justice to try to silence me. The FBI got involved, and Delilah's lies started falling apart. Her lawyer, tied to Pinnacle, couldn't help her anymore. The EPA and FBI were moving fast, and Delilah's fancy connections couldn't save her. She thought she could bully me into giving up, but I'd turned her own tactics against her, and now the lake itself was fighting back, ready to reclaim what she'd stolen. The EPA's investigation changed everything. They shut down Delilah's mansion, saying it was an environmental hazard. Her infinity pool was leaking chemicals into the lake, and her basement was starting to flood as they dug up the illegal dirt she'd used to build on the wetlands. She pleaded guilty to federal charges, breaking the Clean Water Act, lying to agents, and trying to bribe me. She got 18 months probation, $75,000 in fines, and a lifetime ban from any HOA. Her mansion lost 60% of its value, and she filed for bankruptcy. The other 4 mansion owners faced fines too, and had to pay to fix the damage they'd caused to the lake. The neighborhood was done with Delilah's rules. We held an emergency election, and I became the new HOA president with 89% of the vote. Mabel became secretary, and we threw out every petty rule Delilah made. No more fines for feeding ducks or having wrong mailboxes. The EPA started fixing the lake, digging out the illegal dirt, and letting the natural springs flow again. The water got clearer, and ducks came back in huge numbers. Hundreds of them, just like Sarah loved. Neighbors started working together, planting trees and cleaning the lake. It felt like a real community again, not a place ruled by fear. Some folks moved away, still upset about the fighting, but most stayed and helped rebuild. We started a scholarship in Sarah's name, using EPA settlement money to help kids study environmental protection. The lake became a model for other communities, with school groups visiting to learn about saving wetlands. My bridge was rebuilt, stronger than before, with new duck carvings that caught the morning light. Neighbors came by to fish or just sit, saying it was the heart of the neighborhood now. Even Delilah's old friends admitted it was beautiful. 6 months later, I stood on my bridge at sunrise, watching a family of ducks swim by with 6 fuzzy ducklings. The lake sparkled, clean and alive again, like Sarah would have wanted. My YouTube channel, Karen Stories, had 500,000 subscribers, with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. I was helping them fight back, just like I did. The neighborhood was healing, but I still wondered, did Delilah think she could bully everyone forever? Or did she just not expect a guy like me, a stubborn widower with Navy training and a love for his wife, to fight back and win? Nature got its justice, and so did Sarah's memory. But the question lingers, can one person's greed really hurt a whole community? Or does it take a community standing together to stop it?